Hello out there, and today we're going to be doing an overview of the newly released CRKT Piet, and this is a design by Voxnaes. It's one of the 4 knives that I picked up immediately upon release, and before we go too further into this, let me just give you a rundown of how the schedule for videos on those knives is going to go. Just because I've carried this the most, which, spoiler alert, is definitely a good thing, this is the one that I'm going to be talking about first. I think the next video we'll see will be a 10 things to know video about the Thero right here, and then the Anara and the Lucas Burnley Tuna. Videos on those will be coming after, so maybe a couple weeks before we get to those, but the Thero probably in the next 7 days. All right, so let's just refocus though and talk all about this new lightweight design, the most inexpensive design of the 4 that I picked up, coming in at $29.95. And that one, actually, it appealed to me a lot for that reason, because of my ongoing look into the budget realm, sub $30. It definitely had a lot of appeal for that reason, but also, I was just a little bit hesitant about it, hesitant about the quality that we might see from a super cheap kind of CRKT knife. And if you're looking for just the quick breakdown and overview, I'm really impressed with the way that they have executed this knife that doesn't leave anything, at least for me, to be desired. And we're going to really delve deep into that whole budget material kind of discussion and when the budget materials really work and why they work in this case so much. All right, but let's get started with just some general size comparisons and weight and the basic things that we need to know about the knife. The first comparison that I have, unfortunately, I don't have a regular size polar, so here is the large polar, which is actually pretty close to similar in overall length and definitely in blade length. All right, and then another knife that I really want to compare this one to a lot today is the Mini Griptilian. This is definitely a Mini Griptilian channel. There are a lot of parallels between these two in terms of the way they use the materials that they have. Here is the Paramilitary 2, because, gotta have it. Sage 5. And here's another one from that budget series, the Kershaw Epistle, which is a much longer knife. And now let's jump into the weight of this knife, give you the rest of those specs before we move into the other details. This is a very lightweight knife. It does have full stainless steel liners on both sides though, so I really do appreciate having that kind of structure. 2.46 ounces though, never gonna have any kind of complaint about that as our weight. Looking at it next to the Mini Griptilian, just for comparison, 2.72, so a little bit lighter on the Piet. I was very confused about how to pronounce this knife, as I am with a lot of knives in general, but definitely some Vox designs. But the people at CRKT say Piet, and so I am saying Piet, and that's the end of it. When we get into this, we're talking about 8CR13 MOV as our blade steel. I know that it's going to come up in the comments because it always does, and there's always discussion. I wish it was in a better steel, yada yada. I don't use 8CR, yada yada. Guys, I use it all the time. I like it. I know that I might have a larger collection than most people, so I might not have to maintain a lot of things as often as people do who use the same single knife every day. But I've already had to touch this knife up twice, and it has not been a problem doing it at all. So 8CR for me is a complete non-issue. When we focus more on the blade, the biggest point, and it's not really going to come across on camera, but this has a finish that just jumps. I like satin finishes in general, but this one, I don't know if it's just the degree of polish or what it is. Let's bring no, you can't really tell, you can't see just how it pops, but it is just a very striking blade, and I just love the look of it. Now you might be able to see as I try to get it to catch the light, there are some light scratches showing up in the finish already as it is, just from use, and I mean there are some that are easy to wipe off after you use them, and I'm sure we're all familiar with that. But we also have some that are just permanent, and yeah, there you can see them sort of coming in. So the finish is getting scratched up. That sort of comes with the territory of using a knife to any degree. And I think the future of this for me, I'll probably end up disassembling it at some point and doing like a stone wash, and that will look very pretty as well, I'm sure. But overall, with the blade, it has just a really good kind of like light, easy, lightweight EDC kind of use blade. You know, this is not going to be one that you're going to want to break down 1,000 boxes with, but it is really good just for the daily kind of tasks. So it's going to be that kind of person's EDC knife. Could it deliver in a pinch? Absolutely, I think so. But, you know, it's really not meant for anything too crazy as far as hard use. One thing I have noticed when cutting with this knife is that just because the blade length is so short, that sometimes as I'm cutting, instead of slicing and pulling up out of the cut, I'll be pushing down and in when I need to be more forceful. And when that happens, sometimes, you know, if you're aiming to be beginning the cut sort of in the middle of the blade and you push down further, you can hit that sort of dead area here and sort of hinder the cut. So that does happen, again, lending itself to the idea that we're not using this for anything like real heavy, strong purposes, kind of thing like that. Now, as we move on back, we have the plastic scales, glass-filled nylon, whatever we're going to call it, it's a plastic. And this is where I'm sort of going to go off on a tangent and go into detail about this material and why it works so well in this case. So when it comes to budget materials, there are knives that I have had in the past where I've said it really needs something better. You know, the design merits something better than the budget materials. And then there's other times where I just don't believe that. This is one of those times where I don't believe this knife needs anything better than what it's been given here. Now, that doesn't mean that if they came out with a carbon fiber or a micarta version that I wouldn't be interested. You know, if they slapped M390 on this and put it in micarta, it'd sell like hotcakes. Everybody would want one, and it would be a great knife. I'm not arguing that point at all. But what I am saying is that the choices that they made, the way they chose to execute the plastic scale, and the way that it's shaped, and the way that it just feels in hand, it doesn't leave you wanting more. You know, if we're going to do a real spoiler, as much as I love the design of the tuna here, the materials and just the way that it's executed, it leaves me wanting just a little bit more with some of the stuff that they did. Would that be an awesome knife with an upgrade? Sure. Would the Piet be an awesome knife with an upgrade? Sure, but the Piet doesn't need the upgrade. And hopefully, like, I'm getting across how that distinction works. You know, when we're looking, and here comes a comparison to the mini grip. When we're looking at the Benchmade Mini Griptilian, these scales are plastic too. I don't think this needs better scales than what it has. These scales feel great in the hand. They're functional. They're not slick. I think they look pretty good too. And that's really the same way that I feel about the Piet. You know, with the mini grip, do I have a bunch of upgraded mini grips? Absolutely. Would I love an upgraded Piet? Sure. But at $29.95, I don't need it. And I didn't need CRKT to do any more than they did with this knife. Now, another way that that they've sort of captured that is with the washers, which we will get back to in just a bit. Let's go a little bit further with this idea as we talk about the ergonomics, and we're in the carport now, a little bit of natural light so you can see the texture on this plastic scale a little bit better. And yeah, just what I really like about it is it's the same kind of texture that was on the Voss, which was that field strip model, and it's not super grippy, but it is intentional. You know, it is meant to have a good kind of feel to it. It isn't slick. You're never going to see slickness with this texture. It's a smart looking and a smart feeling kind of way to execute a plastic scale. The other thing, which I will mention again, I think when we get back to the main part of the video, is just the way that the full liners on each side sort of nest in there and support the scales. They don't feel flimsy. Is there a little give here? Sure, just a little bit. But it's nothing like on the Benchmade bug out. So, I mean, you do have that structure and it feels good. You know, I've always said the same thing about the Spyderco Delica is, oh, you just think, oh, it's FRN, it's a plastic scale. And then you get it in hand and you're like, oh, this is a pretty darn good scale. And that's actually how I feel about this. And the way that it's machined, there's no sharpness on the edges. It just doesn't feel cheap. And I struggle to come up with the actual specifics of it. But if we bring out another knife that's similar, like the Kershaw Volt, this has a plastic scale on top of liners, same kind of deal. This one is assisted opening and a very old model, so it's going to be different, but the way that you can draw a parallel here is just that for me, when I'm holding this, it feels cheap. It just feels like a cheaper knife. It feels like it is not of the same kind of quality. What exactly is done with like the molding and the actual material to make it feel that way, I don't know, and it sort of has to be treated on like a case-by-case basis when it comes to stuff like that. But getting back to the Piet, we do just have something that I think looks good, fits with the design of the knife, and doesn't feel like an inferior quality material, even though it is something that is budget. Ergonomically, you can see that it does fill the hand really well. I don't really get any hot spots holding it in my right hand. Pretty comfortable, even though there is no jimping. It's not particularly slick, locks in nicely. This forward choil here is not really going to be large enough though to choke up with, so sort of a I don't know, I'm not necessarily going to call it wasted area, but it isn't going to be useful there unless you're doing something super light and you can just choke up here with no like excessive force that's going to cause you to slide down. You could get on here comfortably, but I don't know, it's not necessarily something I would recommend. Is there a hot spot left-handed? A little bit of one, actually, because when I'm pushing down and bearing down on it hard, just like the liner on this side, in between the liner and the scale, can be a little bit sharp, but that is... But as we continue to move along the knife, you can see inside we do actually have full liners on both sides. So really nicely nested on this inside here. Very, very thin liner, but it does provide that structure. And then we have the liner lock mechanism. My big question, and the thing that I was worried about with this design was, is it going to lock up really well? Is it going to be manufactured to a good degree of quality? And it is. This thing hasn't moved at all. I've used it quite a bit, a lot of cardboard, a lot of just basic cutting and stuff with it. And yeah, it didn't have any kind of problem at all. And that's sort of what I anticipated, because in the past, especially, the Polars and some of the other Vox knives especially, they have those frame locks. They have been inconsistent with the way they've been executed. So I've been very happy with that so far. And then as we move even further back, let's take a look at this backspacer. What a great choice. If we're looking for aesthetics and just a pop of color, that is just pretty. It's super pretty. Good looking blue. I like the way that when you see this lanyard hole on the inside here, you can actually see the blue through it. Just smart, it just gives you a little bit more bang for your buck. If a knife looks really good, it creates value, and I think that looks really good. And then we also, you can see, have this reversible deep carry pocket clip and a lanyard hole. Believe it or not, it's possible. So the deep carry clip right here, excellent clip. So we've got that going for us as well. Carries nice and deep, relatively easy to get in and out of the pocket, and as you can see, it comes to like a point right here, so really easy to get your grip as you're pulling it in and out. All right, the last thing to talk about, essentially, we sort of already covered the lockup. The last thing to talk about really is opening and closing and the washers. And you can see inside here, this has seen a lot of pocket time. It is a little bit on the dirty side, but we do have Teflon washers. And this knife, over the week or so, not even week yet, but the time that I've had it, it has continually just broken in and broken in and broken in and gotten smoother and easier to actuate. It's always been very easy to open, but the closing is just, I've seen less and less friction as time goes. So the manual action on those washers for me is not a problem at all. It's really nice and snappy. You can see it's not going to drop shut, but it's not hard to just swing it shut. So, the execution there is very good. Here's the centering. The detent is sort of exactly what you'd want. I like generally a very strong detent, but here, not being a flipper, it is really easy to just break that detent and flick the knife open, so it doesn't need to be super strong. It's not loose to the point where it shakes out at all, but you can slow roll it, which is nice. You can thumb flick, and you can spider flick. Might not be able to get it. Oh, there you go. But I mean, I'm left-handed, so I spider flick left-handed. So, I mean, that's super easy. So just a lot of ways to open and close this knife, and it's just very accessible, very easy to do it. You know, and again, when we're talking about making the decisions, like this knife did not need, in my opinion, upgraded washers. It doesn't need it. If they went all out with it and made it a $150 knife, I'm sure they would do it and put it on IKBS. And every time I see the IKBS stamp on a knife blade, I'm like, all right, cool, I'm good. I like that. But here, you don't need it. And so they're making these strategic decisions on how to make a budget knife, and they're cutting in the right places and not cutting in the right places. Another perfect example of that. So talking about opening and closing again, right? Chamfering around this nice opening hole. It's wonderful. No sharpness whatsoever. So really easy to dig in and open this knife over and over again. Get in there and not worry about that. I mean, the machining there is great. So while it might look like they did some things to save money as far as materials, they definitely didn't cut corners. And that's the big difference. And that's the thing that I think CRKT has really hit on with this knife versus some of the other things that are out there. And again, when we get to that talk about the tuna, there's going to be a one or two things where I feel like they missed out on that they could have capitalized on. And here, I think they used the materials that they had in such a smart way to make a knife that I look at and I say, I don't think I need it to be any better than it is. I mean, this knife, I was curious about it almost more than anything, and this one might end up being my favorite CRKT of the bunch that I got, which I certainly was not expecting at all. All right, guys, so that's really what we have. I mean, we have a excellent $30 knife. I will say I've talked to one friend of mine who also has this, and he did have some QC issues with his. How rampant anything like that is going to be. I mean, anytime a knife comes out at first, there are some issues with every model that I've ever seen. And then over time, you know, those things sort of get corrected and the second runs always get better than the first runs. That's the nature of things. So, I mean, the only people that I've known who've had them besides me are like two other people. One guy had a fine one guy didn't. So, I mean, as far as that stuff goes in these early days, you got to make that call for yourself and see how that's going to go. That the jury's going to be out on that for a long time before we actually see how consistent this knife is. But this specific one in front of me today is a knocked out of the park home run ball for sure. So the last question is, how does it stack up versus the other Budget Blade series knives? All right, and the Budget Blade series, guys, if you're not aware, is my quest to find the best under $30 knives. Check the playlist in my profile here, and you can see the reviews for all of these knives. I'll make sure that is updated before this video goes live, all right? But if we're talking about the best ones, so the number one is the Ganzo FH71, and again, these are all under $30 knives. The FH41 is right there with it. And then prior to now, we had the Rake P662. And then, where is that Kershaw Epistle? The Kershaw Epistle was right here. And then at the bottom, the 511 Incepta Curia. Now, I've got to say, this is a great group of knives. Any of these five, I mean, is an excellent choice. I haven't had a bad one of these yet. I'm waiting to find a new release, crappy $30 knife. I'm still looking for them, but I mean, it's been a pretty good adventure thus far because we're finding some really good stuff. Now, this is in terms of my preference and the quality and all that sort of thing. And to be honest with you, these two knives sort of flip back and forth. As much as I like the Epistle, I just think the manufacturing quality on some of the other knives is better, and sometimes the Inceptor Curia jumps up above that. Where is this one going to fit? I sort of think at this point, just with my preference, not really gauging it just on quality, the list today is going to look like this. So that's sort of where we are today in this day and age. You know, the Ganzo FH71 at the top, the rake and this CRKT Piet right up there next to each other, neck and neck. I mean, great company for the Piet to be in. And who knows? I mean, this knife, I just don't want to take it out of my pocket. I just want to keep carrying it. I'm carrying it today. I'm going to carry it tomorrow. I'm going to carry it the next day. Like, I feel great about having this knife in my pocket. So who knows how this will climb or descend throughout the year and what other things will be put in there. But as of now, I mean, we've got 6 knives on this list, and all of them are pretty darn good in my estimation, below $30. So check out that list. Let me know your thoughts about this knife or any of the other budget knives, or if you have a suggestion about any recently released last year or so budget knife under 30 bucks, let me know about that also, guys. But any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, I'll be talking with you soon in the comments. Have a good one.